Now, so my full scaps, I make sure the number of promo free EIB media, and that's a GHOne TV. Met me a lot from Angela Bamford, Della Michelle, Miss Nancy, Giovanni, Anite Kufu, Cookie T. Even at a point in time, you can delay movie the show from GHOne TV. What I said, it's me for delay one or my employee, but me funny shape to Berla Mundi. All these people left GHOne TV, and it has taken only Berla Mundi to tell her story. Imagine the others. Now Berla Mundi said, "Hey, let's also be me a subscribe button as well. Now I click a bell notification icon. It's enough follow you. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, baby, gossips24.com and gossips24 TV. Now feel free. So bet you or comment section of our share video. I'm for so any be Now I don't know if the story is same for others, but it appears Berla Mundi in the story will be perhaps maybe I will sugar coating the kakra crampon or the ababe to a one thing will stay soon no because there are a lot of names I be able to mention the likes of Adwala or Dumuino Murphy GHOne TV any idea. And according to Berla Mundi, the main issue on Berla Mundi had to do with her growth because ne say the bosses no money quine money grow. Recently created send us a 1 year per so fee. What I say, oh mama yanka intend the enquadanche. But so we Berla Mundi story or kana or cha backbiting or hot or cha mutina and any so or cha no more financial shape or cha moka say Bella you say or yes or pursue dream pen almost the BJ but you say now quite to say nanti to try and I know GHOne one and now so am I just no Bella no say Biane a Tommy.
I'll talk about the last part of my journey at GHOne into TV3, and I want to use that to just let you understand that sometimes if you sit at one place, you're sitting on your blessing. And it's difficult to make that decision to eventually move, but that move is what brings the growth. But before you make that move, you should have a goal. Do you get how I'm connecting it? Okay. So latter part of my days at GHOne, things had become very tough. I felt like I had grown to a certain limit and the platform could not offer me what I wanted anymore. But I was afraid to make that bold step to leave. And that was because my whole journey as a broadcast journalist had started with GHOne when it was for Charterhouse and eventually when EIB bought it. So from the inception up until that point in my life, I felt like I owed the company, something, a favor, or my career. And so it was going to be very difficult for me to say finally that I'm done and I need to move. I was looking for a way to move because things had become very difficult. I just wasn't finding myself in that space anymore, be it relating with people, the work I was doing, because even before I started the show I was doing before I left, I was doing rhythms. And I always say that every time there needs to be a move, I just wake up, sit in my bed, and God tells me, my friend, it's time, write this down, and I do. And so I had just started the late afternoon show. Just 1 year into it, I had won an award. Then there's an opportunity for me to move, and I'm thinking, I fought so hard to have this show go on air. Because when I wanted it on air, my bosses said, I'm sorry, this is not going on air. We're not letting you leave your previous show because we're not sure we can find anybody to replace you. And so instead of creating a void, we'd rather you stay there and just plateau. I mean, they didn't say plateau, but they just said, we also couldn't find anybody who could do that job, so you might as well stay there. But I had interviewed everybody that mattered in the music industry, in the arts industry, and I was tired. Because a month later, the same person would come and I have to now think of what other question to ask. Because I was recycling them over and over. So I told myself I was done with this and I needed a show that would challenge me. And I was done talking about music only and what are you doing, what's your album about. I just wanted something a bit more challenging. My bosses said no. I had to fight. I had to cry. There were guests who would walk into the building and they'll find me crying. And they're thinking, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, my bosses don't want me to start my new show. And it was all very upset because they just didn't understand the backstory of it. Now, eventually, I had people who helped me and I started that show. A year into that show, I'm told, it's time to move again. And I'm telling God, but you just gave me this idea. So why do I have to move? And he says, well, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to move. Because I made you start this show for a reason. And that was supposed to prepare you for the next journey. I still didn't understand. So TV3 gets in touch with me. The first time, I want to move. I tell them, okay, I'll come. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, I'm like, you people, you're jokers. I'm not moving. So I accept, I sign a contract and everything. It's time for me to move, and then I have to tell them the bitter truth. I'm sorry, but I cannot make it. And it pissed everybody off, I'm sure, at TV3. They were very disappointed because they were just about ready to, put out the PR and say, so Berla is joining us. And this is me being so afraid to move. And so I got stuck in that space. For another 6 months, I was there. Now, this move came in March. So if my calculation is right, the final move I made was in September. So maybe about 5-6 months. Now, while I was there, things took a turn because I was disobedient. I knew I had to go, but I wasn't going. So God said, if that's the case, thank you. If that's the case, then I'm going to make it even more difficult for you. So now all the negative things that had to happen would happen. The backbiting started. There were a lot of accusations here and there. There were people who were treating me like I didn't matter. And I just didn't understand what it meant. But it was just God making the space uncomfortable for me. So eventually, I just told my manager that, you know what, let's see if there's still an opportunity at TV3. So we started having that conversation. They said, well, there is an opportunity still. We left that slot open for you. However, you need to assure us you're coming because we're not going to put together all the materials, getting ready to announce, and you won't come again. And I said, oh, I'm very sure I'm going. Because at that time, I had it. I just couldn't take it anymore. I didn't see myself growing at that point. I was more depressed so I'd come to my show. If my show started at 3 o'clock, I'd get to work at 2:45. That's how badly I didn't want to be in that space. So 2:45, I'm there, and my boss is looking at me like, why are you coming this late? I'm like, oh, sorry, boss, I was doing something. But really, I'd wake up in the morning, and there was really no drive for me to want to be in that space. So I come at 2:45, my show ends, it's an hour, so it ends at 5, and I'm out. And that was consistent for a while. So I knew it was time. Luckily for me, there was an opportunity and I had to move. Now, before that, I needed to ask myself, what really is your goal? Because it's not enough to say, I'm not comfortable here, so I just want to move. Sometimes you don't have a plan. Sometimes God has a plan for you. But at the same time, you also need to have an idea that, okay, maybe in the next 5 years, this is what I want to achieve. And just commit it to God and tell him that do the rest. If really this is not even the brightest idea, you know what to do. Just figure it out and help me. I'm just using my human mind. But that's why he says that your thoughts are not his thoughts and your ways are not his ways. So we plan and we plot. And we all have this fantastic idea of how in the next 5 years, I want to drive the biggest car in Ghana. I want to have the biggest house. I want to be working at the UN. But God is looking at you and thinking, my friend, maybe the UN will come, but not immediately, not in the next 5 years. Maybe I have to prepare and take you through some difficulties. And then in 20 years' time, when I'm sure that you're grown enough, you're mature enough, then I'll put you in that space. TV3 was not on my radar at all. Because at that time, TV3 wasn't doing too well. So it really wasn't part of my plans. I just thought that, okay, right after GHOne, I'm out of this country. I'm going to CNN, I'm going to BBC, and all those things. And everybody will come to you and say, Charlie, what you've gotten today is BBC. So, people plant that in your head, and you feel like, then that's it. Once people are saying it's BBC, I'm not looking left, I'm not looking right. I'm just going. And so any offer that comes, I will not take it. But now I sit back and I think about it and I ask myself, so if BBC had asked you to come and give world news, would you have even understand where to start from? I don't think so. Because again, I was now growing in the social, affairs space. And I was trying to figure out what it meant to even understand the Constitution and all that. I really didn't know. So if I had gone there, I probably would have failed instantly. But funny enough, for someone who was doing entertainment and had just moved into a different space, to be called upon to say, you're going to do the morning show. And you're not just going to do the morning show, you're actually going to start talking to the politicians, so you better start reading around. I was like, okay, I'm not sure this is mine. Maybe someone else, not me. And they said, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to do it. So I moved, and then in the space of 3 months or so, I went to work one morning, and I was admiring the work that my colleague was doing, because he was the guy that had been on the show for so long. It was me and another lady, Crystal, and we had just joined. And he would grill the politicians and ask them all these questions. And every time he's asking them, I'm writing. I'm like, okay, Johnny mentioned ABC. Write it down. When you go home, go and read about it. I didn't know what it was about, but I still would go and read, at least just so that when it's intro time, I look like I know what I'm about. So I'll go and do my chew and pour and come in. And when it's intro, I'm like, yeah, and this politician said this and that. And everybody's like, oh my God, Berla is intelligent. Oh. It was because Johnny had mentioned it the day before. So I'll just go and write it down so that I know that, okay, when it comes to saying this is what he said. Okay, let me just add one or two things to it. And then that's it. But gradually, I started developing an interest in it. And then eventually, I went to work one morning. This was about 3 months into the show, maybe 4. One morning, I go to work. I'm used to seeing Johnny there. And they say Johnny is sick. I said, pardon? Johnny is sick. And I said, so? There's nobody to do the big issues, the political conversation. So, sweetheart, you're going to have to sit in that chair. I said, oh no, I won't do it. Because I hadn't read anything concerning the topics that were trending. But I had to go and sit in that chair. Come and see. I was confused. I didn't know where to start from. I didn't even know who to introduce first. It was a mess, and I'll tell you that for a fact. I don't know if anybody here ever remembers the first day I ever did any political show. But it was a complete mess. And the messages that came, oh my God, who put Berla here? Berla should stay in the entertainment space. It's not for her. All kinds of things. So consistently, I had to face that kind of criticism. But the first day I did it, my boss called me and said, you've been initiated, so get ready because we're going to make this regular. I said, oh my God, no, I don't want to do this. Initially, I fancied the idea of sitting there and grilling the politicians, but I was like, no, this is too much work. I'm not sure I'm ready. And they said, if you keep saying this, you'll never be ready. Sometimes you have to plunge deep. Otherwise, you'll never be ready.
So I'm wondering, say, if this is Berla Mundi's story, then imagine someone like Cookie T. You know? Imagine someone like Miss Nancy. You know? Imagine Angela Bamford. Giovanni. What could be their stories too? You know, it's not all rosy as we see it to be. What I say, kama tese ne yehunu wo TV ne so ne ade no we be gina ho ne into mo wo sisi an so ne bia na so mo go to bibi o bia e bia no mo tumi fi ho no oh o ma ye ti so mpeso mo fi oyi na e bia no mo tumi fi ho no but Berla Mundi de wa share the story said your fame ne de me net so be wish so bia e be famous. I would like to hear the story of perhaps maybe Giovanni, Cookie T, especially Anita Kufo, because there are some interesting rumors. I Gossips 24, but this is Berla Mundi's story. Meaning the audience for her. Maybe more they share girls preferred and then the assistants in your more, but I don't think so. Perhaps they have much to do with Berla Mundi's situation. And how do you say? Maybe, Sisia, Magraheb.